Some organisms age, some organisms repair damage. But there is one, just a few millimeters wide, that does something else entirely. When it reaches the end of its life, it doesn't die. It collapses, it reorganizes, it begins again. And this isn't theory. It's been observed repeatedly. The organism is called Turritopsis dohrnii, a species of hydrozoan jellyfish. It begins life as a larva, settles to the ocean floor, forms a polyp colony. From that colony, adult jellyfish, medusae, are produced. They grow, they mature, they reproduce. This is where the cycle should end. But under stress, injury, starvation, environmental pressure, the adult does something different. It retracts its tentacles, its body contracts, it sinks. Within hours, it becomes a cyst-like mass. And then its cells begin to change. Muscle cells, nerve cells, specialized structures. They convert directly, not into stem cells first, but into entirely different cell types. The organism reorganizes itself into a new polyp colony. From that colony, new medusae emerge, genetically identical to the original. This process is called transdifferentiation. It has been replicated in laboratory conditions. It has been observed in the wild. There is no fixed point at which this cycle must stop. The organism does not avoid damage. It does not resist stress. It responds by starting over, again and again. What happens next depends on how you interpret what you're about to hear.
The most grounded explanation is straightforward. Turritopsis dohrnii can reverse its life cycle under stress, moving from an adult medusa back to a juvenile polyp stage.
Right? And that reversal isn't symbolic. It's a real biological process, transdifferentiation, where mature cells convert directly into other cell types.
So instead of following a linear path toward aging and death, it effectively resets its developmental state and starts again.
And this has been observed repeatedly in laboratory conditions. The organism contracts, forms a cyst-like structure, and reorganizes into a new polyp colony,
which then produces new medusae that are genetically identical to the original. It's not reproduction in the usual sense. It's a reversal of the same individual's life cycle.
Importantly, this doesn't mean it's invulnerable. It can still die from predation, disease, or environmental stress.
Exactly. Biological immortality here just means there's no fixed lifespan imposed by aging itself.
And the mechanism behind it seems tied to cellular reprogramming, genes involved in DNA repair, cell cycle control, and pluripotency are unusually active.
which are the same kinds of systems that, in other organisms, are tightly restricted because they can lead to instability.
But in this case, they appear to be coordinated in a way that allows full-body reorganization without collapse.
That's really the shared baseline, a small animal with an unusual capacity for controlled cellular plasticity.
A system where development isn't strictly one way,
and where aging can be bypassed rather than endured.
All of that is consistent across observations.
Yes, but even within that agreement, there's an underlying question about how stable that system actually is over time.
One point that doesn't fully align is the trigger. We know stress initiates the reversal, but the exact signaling pathway isn't clearly mapped.
right? Stress is doing a lot of work as an explanation. Different populations don't seem to respond identically, which suggests something more specific is happening at the molecular level.
And that raises a timing issue. Under stress, most organisms conserve energy, but this jellyfish initiates a complex, energy-intensive transformation.
That's a real contradiction. Rebuilding an entire body plan is expensive, Yet it happens when resources are presumably limited.
It suggests the response isn't just adaptive in the short term. It may be prioritizing long-term survival over immediate stability.
There's also the question of accumulation. If this process repeats, does damage truly reset or just become less visible?
Exactly. A functional reset isn't necessarily a perfect one. Subtle errors, mutations, epigenetic drift could still carry forward.
And we don't have long-term data from wild populations to confirm whether repeated cycles remain stable indefinitely.
Which connects to population behavior. If this works as cleanly as it seems, you'd expect these organisms to dominate more environments.
But they don't. Something is constraining them. Predation, disease, or perhaps internal limits we haven't detected.
Another inconsistency is evolutionary. Many related species share similar life cycles but don't show this level of reversal.
So, either this is a very narrow evolutionary solution, or something is preventing it from spreading more widely.
And if it's prevention, that implies there are trade-offs we don't yet understand.
Especially given how close the mechanism is to processes that, in other organisms, lead to uncontrolled growth.
Which brings it back to regulation. What keeps this controlled instead of turning into systemic failure?
That boundary isn't well defined.
And without understanding that boundary, it's hard to say whether the system is truly stable.
Or just stable within a range we haven't exceeded yet.
Which means the absence of failure might not be proof of reliability.
It might just mean we haven't observed it long enough to see where it breaks.
I'm not sure the energy argument is actually a contradiction. If the alternative is death, then an expensive reset might still be the optimal path.
But that assumes the organism can reliably afford that cost. Under severe stress, energy availability should be lowest, not highest.
It could be that the process isn't as energy intensive as it appears. Reorganization might be more about reassigning existing structures than building from scratch.
That doesn't fully hold. The system still has to dismantle and rebuild functional tissues, which implies significant metabolic demand.
Or the trigger occurs before total depletion, early enough that the organism still has reserves to execute the reversal.
Then the question becomes, why doesn't every individual trigger it at the same threshold?
Exactly. The variability suggests the trigger isn't just resource-based. There may be signaling noise or competing pathways.
Or environmental context, temperature, salinity, or chemical signals could shift the threshold.
That still doesn't explain why closely related species don't show the same behavior.
It might not be advantageous in all ecological niches. Stability could be more valuable than plasticity in some environments.
But if it truly bypasses aging, it's hard to see why it wouldn't spread more widely.
Unless it comes with hidden costs that outweigh the benefit.
Such as instability over repeated cycles.
Or increased susceptibility to failure during the process itself.
Or regulatory fragility. If the control system slips, the organism could lose structural integrity entirely.
That ties back to the cancer parallel. The same pathways enabling reversal are usually suppressed for a reason.
Right. And we're assuming this species has solved that problem. It might just be managing it within limits.
Which would mean the system isn't fundamentally stable, just conditionally stable.
And those conditions might be narrower than we think.
Or they might degrade over time without being obvious.
We don't actually know if they degrade at all.
And we don't know that they don't.
There's another angle that hasn't been addressed. This isn't just reversal. It's identity continuity through structural collapse.
You mean whether it's the same organism after the reset?
Yes, It dissolves its own body plan and rebuilds from redistributed cells, yet we treat it as a continuous individual.
But biologically, continuity is usually tied to uninterrupted structure. Here, that structure is explicitly broken.
And the nervous system is reorganized in the process. If there were any retained state, it would likely be erased.
Which makes the term same individual more of a convenience than a defined property.
That's fair, but even setting identity aside, the mechanism itself is still the anomaly.
I'm not separating them. The mechanism implies that individuality is more fluid than we assume.
Or that individuality isn't relevant at that level of biological organization.
That would align with colonial organisms, where boundaries between individuals are already ambiguous.
But this isn't just a colony. It's a system that repeatedly disassembles and reassembles itself.
There's also the spread pattern. They've expanded globally through ballast water, often by reverting to polyps during transport.
Which means the reversal isn't rare or exceptional. It's functional enough to support dispersal.
Yet they're not visibly dominating ecosystems.
So either the system is balanced externally, or it's constrained internally.
Or both, and we're only seeing the stable surface layer.
Another unresolved piece is whether any state carries through cycles. Genetic stability doesn't necessarily mean functional continuity.
If nothing carries through, then each cycle is effectively a reset to baseline.
But if something does carry through, damage, drift, or instability, it wouldn't be obvious immediately.
It would accumulate quietly.
Which reframes the entire phenomenon.
How so?
It may not be escaping time.
Then, what is it doing?
It may just be looping, without any clear indication of how many times the loop can run before something finally fails.
If it's looping, then the real question is whether the loop is clean.
Or just appears clean from the outside.
We don't have evidence of cumulative failure.
But we also don't have evidence that there isn't any.
And the absence of visible failure doesn't mean the system is stable.
It could mean the failure point is just distant.
Or subtle enough that we're not measuring the right thing.
Like drift that doesn't show up until much later.
Or instability that only appears under specific conditions.
Which we may not have observed yet.
Then, biological immortality becomes a framing problem.
Yes, because it assumes the reset is absolute.
When it might only be functional.
A system that works until it doesn't.
Without a clear boundary for when that change happens.
So the organism isn't necessarily escaping aging.
It might just be deferring it.
Or redistributing it across cycles.
In a way that hides accumulation.
Which leaves a quieter possibility.
Yes.
That nothing here is actually immortal. Only that we don't yet know how to see where it ends.
At first, it seemed simple. A small organism, a reversible process, a biological exception that could be contained, explained, categorized. A loop instead of a line. But the closer the mechanism is examined, the less it behaves like an exception, and the more it begins to resemble a system we don't fully understand how to measure. The reset looks complete. The structure rebuilds. The organism continues. And yet, nothing confirms that what returns is truly unchanged. Not at the level that matters. There is no clear record of accumulation, no visible marker of degradation, no known limit, only repetition. And repetition, without a way to track error, does not prove stability. It only delays the moment when instability becomes visible. So, the question shifts. Not how does it avoid death, but what kind of failure would we even be able to recognize if it didn't? Because if the system is drifting, slowly, invisibly, then the loop isn't escaping time. It's just moving through it in a way we don't yet know how to see. And if that's true, then the anomaly isn't that something can reset its life. It's that we may have no reliable way of knowing when it finally stops working.